Hello, everybody. My name is Olivia, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you to our first gathering of Face to Face with Elephants, our very last Living One series of 2025. For those of you who don't already know, Living One is the Krulos Center for Nonviolence's webinar series, now in its 6th year. The Krulos Center for Nonviolence is a nonprofit dedicated to generating deep commitment and connection with the world and within ourselves, dissolving divides between human, plant, and animal, mind and body, science and spirit, and self and nature. Through teachings, practice, and community, Krulos catalyzes a shift in how we live, relate, and belong, because healing begins when we remember that we were never apart. This special Living One series, Face to Face with Elephants, celebrates elephants as individuals with diverse, insightful speakers who describe a particular elephant they have known and the psychological depths they have witnessed and journeyed together. In these unique Living One discussions, we plunge into human and elephant psyches and the transformative journey they experienced when living and connecting beyond species bounds. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are thrilled to welcome two wonderful guests, Dr. Gay Bradshaw and Dr. Sandra L. Bloom. Gay is the founder and director of the Krulos Center for Nonviolence. She was the first scientist to diagnose complex post-traumatic stress disorder in free-living elephants and, subsequently, orcas, bears, chimpanzees, and pumas, which launched the field of transspecies psychology. She holds doctorate degrees in ecology and psychology, a master's in geophysics, and was a fellow at the National Science Foundation National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis. She is a certified mindfulness and meditation teacher. Her books include the Pulitzer-nominated Elephants on the Edge, What Animals Teach Us About Humanity, Carnivore Minds, Who These Fearsome Beings Really Are, Talking with Bears, Conversations with Charlie Russell, and The Evolved Nest, Nature's Way of Raising Families and Creating Connected Communities. She is the primary carer for rescued colonized animals, including disabled endangered tortoises and wildlife at Grace Village. Dr. Sandra L. Bloom is a board-certified psychiatrist, graduate of Temple University School of Medicine, and currently Associate Professor of Health Management and Policy at the Dornsiff School of Public Health at Drexel University. For the past 30 years, Dr. Bloom has done pioneering work in the field of traumatic stress studies and is a past president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. Dr. Bloom originated and has written 3 books about the sanctuary model, and in 2020, she introduced a new online organizational approach called Creating Presence. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulos Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, daku-betite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Finally, we ask that all of us participate today with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. And now I'm so glad to welcome Izzy, Gay, and Sandra.
Thank you, Olivia.
Hello, indeed, to both of you, and thank you so much, Olivia. Now, I think our idea is to start with Gay on the theme of this series, Face to Face with Elephants, and that will segue us in very neatly to talking to Sandra, finding out more about trauma and trauma-informed work so that we can get a real handle and understanding on the situation that affects so many people and also so many non-human animals. So if I start with you, Gay, and we're focusing on Elephants on the Edge, a book that possibly many people really associate you with. That's probably the one that most people will know you for. And it has had such acclaim. I've seen it quoted in so many papers. You've made a huge impact. Could you give us an outline of what the thesis was in that book? What paradigm you were shifting in writing Elephants on the Edge?
Oh, thank you. And it's wonderful to be here. It feels a little deja vu-like that I'm kind of now quoting history. Yeah, the byline or the theme of the book is non-humans, trees. Well, not at the time I was in it, but we have to include all beings, have the comparable capacities to experience psychophysiological trauma. And the subtext of that, which is really the main one, is in this case, elephants and all other animals are psychological. They're psychological beings, which was uniquely considered to be human and excluding other species. So that's the kind of the theme. And it was my dissertation, and it became a book. Was really a journey into that space and trying to understand sort of from the inside out what an individual, in this case elephant, experience was. And I coined at the time, and that was when I was in graduate school getting my degree, I coined the term transspecies psychology. And at the time, it was really mainly aimed at the school I was at and my cohort of students, to try to get people to kind of cut through the species barriers to understand that there really is a way of observing and understanding non-humans and humans using the same lens.
If we sort of focus in on elephants here, and I just taken one of the many powerful quotations that I've highlighted in your book, and this sort of describes the situation of so many elephants. The decline of the elephant family is an often repeated story. In North Luangwa National Park, Zambia, 93% of the population has been killed, and traditional herds composed of mothers and allo mothers are virtually absent. Many infants are reared by inexperienced, highly stressed single mothers without the detailed knowledge of local plant ecology, leadership, and support that a matriarch and allo mothers provide. So you were very much looking into the families of the elephants who you were studying, in the same way that anthropologists would look to a human community.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Archbishop Desmond Tutu endorsed the book, which was really wonderful. And he had in our correspondence, it's a very famous quote from him. I think he was Xhosa, and his mother was another tribe. When you ask someone from the village, well, how are you? And the individual may be perfectly healthy, perfectly fine, but answer in the plural, well, we're not doing very well, because they think in the plural, in terms of the whole community. And to me, that really captures how elephants feel and think and function. It's in this, like I said, in the plural in that way. And it was interesting when you quoted that about the detail of plant ecology and things like that. It's not just in these objects and there is absolute knowledge, but it's an embodied life. And so, like, for example, these youngsters that were orphaned from mass killing in helicopters, that was the focus of actually started the whole investigation on my part. And they grew up, they were translocated, they witnessed this horrible slaughter of their families with guns and, from helicopters. They were tethered, and they were, translocated to another place. And I remember Cynthia Moss asking her, and she said, it's really specific. It's not just like, one part of the savannah into another, you know what I mean? It's very specific. And it's also, she didn't use this term, but I did, it's embodied. And so, that's the whole thing about, it's not just family, and it's the other animals, it's the trees, it's the water. It's a very holistic, very non-dual way of living and a way of perceiving the world.
And you mentioned the sort of the byline idea of the book, that we acclaim you for acknowledging that non-humans can suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. So in your understanding from the research that you did, we've talked a little bit about what caused the trauma, but if you wouldn't mind just sort of like outlining that, but also what the symptomology was, what would you as the transspecies psychologist make that diagnosis based upon?
Well, I hope my colleague who follows will expand on that.
Indeed,
I have to
indeed,
say
I
that
know she will.
it was Sandy's work that was really was truly literally eye-opening for me. When I went into this, I really didn't have a psychological bone in my body. I came in, I had a course on trauma, and then I went, oh my gosh, what triggered my purpose in retrospect, which wasn't really conscious but unconscious, of going into this, was to be able to find language, to be able to express what I personally experienced about animals with whom I have spent time and grown up with, and things. And so, psychology offered that language, and the trauma thing was just like bang. And the specific example that came from my memories when I first went to Africa was hearing about these young male elephants who were 15, 16 years old, in a reserve. I think all of the elephants in South Africa are in reserves or parks or provincial or national parks. And they had, over a 10-year period, these young males, they were teenagers in at least 2 reserves, had killed over 100 white and black rhinoceroses, who are endangered. And at first, the biology, I remember hearing about it there, and I was there for National Science Foundation Lion Project, and I was, kind of goobering along, and this park ranger was going on and on about the elephants, killing, and it lodged there. But my focus then, I thought, okay. He also told me a story, which I have to say, I thought was more bizarre, and that was at the particular park that we were going to be seeing the first time for lions. Was he said, yeah, this man had, he was in the circus somehow, and he had these 2 elephants, and he was going to bring them back. And so he somehow got the money and brought them back to Africa, and they were there. And the ranger was telling me, he said, yeah, and it was so emotional, was when the man saw them again. I mean, these are grown, I think they were female, but they were fully grown, maybe their 40s or something. He said they immediately sat up with their hands, like, they were trained, which is, you have to realize in the circus, they were babies and they were tortured. I mean, they call it training, but it's torture. So that was what stuck in my head. I thought, well, that's more bizarre than an elephant killing a rhino. I mean, that's kind of where I was at. But when I started, it kind of surfaced again when I was doing my psychological graduate work. And what those males did is they some of them sexually assaulted rhinoceroses, and both of them are herbivores. They're very pacific. They hang out with each other even. And so that just kind of like, wow. And so something that was significant was that researchers, elephant research, and the park people said, okay, we're going to, they don't have a family. You know what I mean? They don't have, in elephant culture, what they do is that the baby's born with the owl mothers and the babies, like you said, in this constellation. And then the females stay, but the males, when they're, it depends where, but, 10, 12, 13 are leave, or sometimes kind of pushed out. And they join what they call an all bull of older male group or area. And until like they're in their early 30s, they don't go into must, which is this hormonal secretion of, it's a mark of sexual maturity. So these individual elephants, young males, were becoming sexually active, and they were assaulting rhinos and killing them. And so that was the particular case of the symptoms there. And then I, kind of looked at their biographies, but they brought these big males in. This is an important thing. And I would like Sandy to maybe talk about that too, is they brought these big males and saying, well, these are kind of young, they didn't say young punks, but basically these teenage kids that are out of control. They don't have big guys around to, dominate them. That's the word, dominate them. And so they brought these big guys in, and then, things quieted down, but started up again a few months later, or I don't know what the time frame, it wasn't very long. And so as a result, the young males were removed, which is a politically correct saying. They were shot, they were killed. So the reconstructing the structure of an elephant, normative elephant life was insufficient. That's kind of the whole lesson that I know Sandy will delve into is, we're not dealing with objects, and so that was really important, is to de-objectify our perception of elephants, or de-objectify the elephants, in our way of seeing them in that way. Now it's epidemic in South Africa and elsewhere, like Uganda and different places, where there's infanticide. So females will be killing each other's babies and their own, and males will kill females. Now you see this in circuses, and you see it in zoos, in particular, I think zoos, because they're not as often chained. But you'll have, like, I remember, I think it was Tel Aviv Zoo, it's in the book, where a male, I think he was like in his 30s, might have been 40, he killed a female elephant he'd been living with for decades. Just quote unquote out of the blue, killed her, and they've been living together for a long time. So those are some of the symptoms, if that answers your question.
Yes, and you mentioned bringing Sandy in, and indeed I'd like to do that, because Sandra, given your decades-long career in traumatology and trauma-informed care, and we are also very mindful that you have another book coming out, a co-edited book, the Oxford Handbook of Trauma-Informed Social Health, which is just full of insightful and deep and incredible essays by a variety of people. And I have had the privilege of being able to look through the introduction to that. But hearing what Gay has said, and I mean, I know you know this from your conversations with Gay in the past, but hearing that, how do you interpret the aggressive behavior of normally such peaceful animals as elephants?
Can I ask one thing before Sandy? Sandy, I want to ask you a question before you go on. I wanted to say, since we're sort of 20 years since, my work came out, the formal diagnosis of PTSD, not only elephants, but as you mentioned, other animals. And it has yet, the concept of trauma, the paradigm, which I know Sandy will talk about, the paradigm shift from behavior, animals as objects, where they're looked at from the outside and their behavior is the symptom, it's not used as that, to psychological, just has not stuck. In fact, it's been expurgated.
Yes.
So there's a lot of, it's been questioned, even though my work really wasn't that original. All I did was put the pieces together. You know what I mean? I put the pieces together and went, okay, wow, the brain, this and this and this, the depth and breadth of research on trauma, even by the time I was there, which was, I don't even know what it was, but 20 plus years ago, was incredible. And a lot of that research not only came from humans, clinical studies, the Holocaust, all of these longitudinal studies, etc., but animal models. That is to say, a lot of the depth and the precision, and Sandy, you can say if I'm exaggerating, of even the physiological processes, etc., has been done and learned from animals in experiments. So there's this understood appreciation and belief that animal brains, cats and dogs and rats and you name it, they chimpanzees, primates, non-human primates, have the same machinery and capacities that machinery does, if you're looking at it from a neuroscience perspective and psychological, that we do. So
Yeah.
It's known. But the
A mammal's a mammal.
And I always ask Sandy this. I say to her, and birds do it too, birds and reptiles. So I always ask Sandy, why has it been 2+ decades since the elephant PTSD and all of that came out with other publications, and it still has yet to be adopted? And in fact, a lot of that, idea of a psychological life of an animal, even in elephants, and also the notion of susceptibility to trauma, psychological trauma, is expurgated. It's just totally ignored or questioned. And so that has been really my question. I always ask Sandy, and that's the question I have for her. So I didn't mean to take from that time, but Sandy is just so,
Well, it's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that the words trauma and traumatization are on the banned list, Trump's banned list. Okay, that's not a coincidence. So it isn't just about it not penetrating around animals. We've only scratched the surface of it penetrating with humans. So there still is enormous resistance to understanding that this is really a paradigm shift in the most profound ways. That's what we're trying to make happen. And as a result, there's enormous resistance, because if we change the paradigm of how we understand human suffering and animal suffering, we have to change everything. And there's enormous resistance in that. And that is how I understand it, because, it was 1998 when the Adverse Childhood Experiences study first came out. So how many years ago is that? 27 years ago, almost 30 years ago. And still, how many people know about it, even though most Americans will have an ACEs score, and a substantial proportion will have an ACEs score of 4 or more. And we know now that there's a direct correlation between what your ACEs level is and the 10 most common causes of death. We know that. It's not debatable anymore. There's been hundreds of research projects to demonstrate that. But what impact has that had on anything? Very little. So, and it's because it does, once you get it, everything shifts. You start seeing the world in an entirely different way. And that should compel us to do things differently. And that is scary for people. And most people have symptoms related to chronic stress, toxic stress, relentless stress, and trauma. So people have a hard time dealing with their own. I teach undergrads and graduate students. And it is amazing to watch these young people come aware that this is knowledge they do not have. They have not been exposed to. They don't know. They don't know the impact of childhood adversity. They don't know about development. So they don't know it for themselves and their families, much less for animals. I mean, and that Gay, I think, is why it's taking so long. It's taking so long everywhere to get this major shift that has to happen if we're going to survive. I mean,
Now we are.
there's no other way we're going to survive as on the planet unless we change, really shift our mental models.
Yes, Sandra, in the paper I read from the book about the history of trauma studies, and you make exactly that point. You suggest that the field seems to be repeatedly forgotten and then discovered again. Oh my goodness, look at this. And then further in discovery, realized that, oh, wait a second, 50 years ago we knew something.
Yes, exactly. over and over again, and then it's repressed. And then, I think what we do is like the elephants that Gay was describing, we go to war. Instead of dealing with it, we go to war. So, if you look at the modern premises of PTSD came out of the Vietnam War, and people were very ambivalent about that whole war and never really finished processing it. But the studies of trauma really originate with that. But then we go to war again. We have 9/11. What do we do? Oh, let's go shoot somebody. So it's not just the elephants, the teenage elephants. This is part of what we do as a way of not really dealing with the long-term impacts of trauma as whole communities, as whole nations.
In the introduction, you talk about this being a traumatogenic culture, and one of the aspects I found that explained it very clearly was this idea of there being a cognitive threshold. So at a certain point, it's as if we can no longer make sense of the culture that we're living in, and that's it. And then the bits start flying off. If you could sort of express that in ways that don't sound quite so informal.
Yeah, because I think that's right where we are. We're right there at that point. This is the work of a woman named Rebecca Costa, and she wrote a book called Watchman's Rattle. And in it, she says every civilization reaches what she calls a cognitive threshold, and the signs of that. And I have to remember what she says. The signs are gridlock. So certainly in the United States, I mean, it is unbelievable the gridlock we're in. Although Tuesday at least, gave a little bit of hope, but still we don't even have a government. Our government isn't even, so gridlock is one of the signs. And the other sign is the trading in facts for beliefs, no matter how crazy the beliefs. And she says those are the signs that a civilization is at this point has reached their cognitive threshold. And what I'm hoping, Izzy, is that when enough people understand what I have come to understand, that we'll be able to surmount that cognitive threshold. That's my hope. That's why I keep going. There's no signs of retirement at this point. I'm working on another book now. Me and, getting some help from ChatGPT.
That's why Thich Nhat Hanh says monks never retire.
Right. There's way too much to do.
Sorry to interject, but Sandy, can let me ask you something? What is the phenomena, though, that trauma is in the vernacular? You hear people say, "Oh, so traumatized," I just like, I'm in, in the sense of, and oh, I'm so stressed. Can you talk about that a little, or what that means?
Ask me the question in a different way.
Well, it's in the common vernacular. Like you'll be in a, hearing someone or talking. It doesn't have to be us. And someone will say, "Oh my God, I was so traumatized the other day when he walked into the room and started screaming." So it's not trauma with the capital T, or, like, "How you doing?" "Oh, I'm totally stressed." So I'm saying that the terms stress and trauma are now in the vernacular, whereas they weren't 20 years ago. I don't know, I'm making that up. But does that indicate anything in terms of, I'm not sure what question I'm asking, but it's kind of like it's disjunct with the, as you say, the understanding of what that is.
Well, it's every one of my students. So right now I have a class of 50 undergraduates, and they're doing public health, but some of them are in psychology, some of them are doing all kinds of things. And they all come into this course because they say, "I wanted to know more about trauma." So they come in having an idea like you just described, that that's what it is. And then as a result of the course, they get a sense of what it really is. And they talk about that. They share that I had no idea about what happens to people who are trafficked, who are sexually trafficked. I had no idea of what happens when you're little and you witness violence. You know, they get to know what it really means. And yeah, it has entered the vernacular, and people don't really know what they're trying to express something, but the language, English is very limited when it comes to these domains. I don't know if there's any language that does, but we don't have a lot of words that really describe what people are trying to say. So in my world, we talk about toxic stress. It's what little kids experience who are exposed to adversity. We talk about relentless stress, which is, you know, living in poverty, living with racism. You know, it always is there. You're always getting hit with it. And then we talk about traumatic stress. So at least, you know, trying to sort out, put this along a long continuum that begins with normal stress, tolerable stress, and then moves into the rest of them. So it just is not well articulated. It's not well differentiated. So people use the words that they've got available to them.
I want to come back to non-humans in a moment, but I think that, you know, this is such an important part of your work, that there is this kind of two-way thing going on to one extent, we throw the word trauma around when we mean a little bit upset. But on the other hand, there is this failure to recognize all the aspects of society that genuinely are causing traumatic responses in various people. And so if you could sort of give us a sense of what those things are, and from your perspective and all of the work that you do, when you talk about a trauma-informed social health, you're not just talking about, you know, everyone has a bit of CBT. You're talking about changing the whole structures, so education systems, hospitals, workplaces, as well as sort of like families, and so if we could, I know it's a huge area, and but just to sort of ground it a little.
Sure. My background was in treating, kind of waking up to. I started an inpatient unit, just in a general hospital, in a suburban general hospital, and a couple years into that program, we started to recognize that there were people who had terrible things happen to them, often sexual abuse as children and other bad things. And at first it was just startling. And then when we started asking about it, we found out it was pretty much almost everybody had something really bad happen to them they had never talked about to anybody, and that were directly related to the symptoms that we were supposed to be treating. And after a while, it was evident to me that this is not acceptable. I've been taught as a psychiatrist that these are all, mental illness is mysterious and it's biological and genetic, and who knows where it comes from, but it doesn't come from anywhere. And what we were finding out was, oh yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. It's very clear where it comes from. It comes from the really horrible things that happen to people. And it was no longer mysterious in the least. But what it also meant was that it was entirely preventable. And that really pissed me off. Because we were not talking about prevention. It was, get more and more and more patients in to treat, but there would be a never-ending stream unless we went upstream to do something about the people that are hurting people. And that's how I ended up in public health. It's all pretty much, not all, I don't want to be too extreme, but most mental illness is preventable if we got to people early enough. But it means you have to get to them when they're children. And that relates to everything that Gay was describing about the elephants and the trauma they experience when they're baby elephants is what's going to, be a problem for them later in life in all different ways, like it is with people. I don't think it's that different because the physiology is very similar. They have a fight flight response. Their brains are like our brains, and we become hyper aroused, and so will the other mammals that we share the planet with. And the consequences are quite likely to be very similar. It'll look different species to species, but it's coming from the same place. You can't hurt a baby animal of any kind and not have negative consequences. It's actually pretty simple. But what it means is, oh my God, it's so huge. It means we have to reckon with the whole issue of abuse of power. That is, dominance is what we favor in our culture, not democracy. That's obviously easy to get rid of since we're busily getting rid of it. It means changing the whole issue of what justice is because right now justice is tied to punishment, retribution. Mm-hmm. And how's that working out? Not well, because it won't. It can't. You can't punish somebody into health. And so we have to really be focused on the entire different educational system, justice system, healthcare system, political system, economic system. Everything has to change. And that's what is so threatening to the powers that be. And that's really at the heart of why, we can't talk about this stuff, because it's a political issue. And it's a hot political issue, which is why those words get banned by Trump and his whoever they are.
What you were saying about, where does mental health problems come from? Right back at the beginning, it reminds me of I think it's a sort of often used image of sort of public health that. There you have these people are running towards a cliff, and hey, isn't it great? We've got an ambulance at the bottom, and oh no, we can do better than that. We can have a safety net halfway up the cliff, and oh no, we can do better than that. We can stick a fence at the top. They just crash into the fence, and that'll be fine. Or we could maybe encourage people not to be running off cliffs in the first place.
Exactly.
Why do you feel it is? I mean, you suggested it, you implied it. Why do you feel that this is so it is so against the interests of those in power to be aware of this?
I think they're probably dreadfully caught in the same trap other people are, and they've never dealt with their own childhood histories at all. Even less than most people. So I think that the power then becomes a substitute for the love that they never got, the care that they never got. And so they seek power, and then it becomes part of the problem with trauma is there's a compulsive reenactment of trauma that occurs. I don't know it in animals, I know it in people. That it's called traumatic reenactment, and it is unconscious. Probably everybody on this call has probably known somebody who was in a bad marriage, worked really hard to get out. It was hell. They got out, and you watch as they get back into another terrible relationship. and they don't see it. And you try to help them see it, but they don't see it. No, 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 it's different. It's different. It's all going to be great. And it's terrible. And there they are, back in the same situation. That's called reenactment. And it is a powerful dynamic in human existence that we tend to repeat kind of whatever keeps us alive. Even if life is terrible, we're still alive, so it must be working. That's the deep down unconscious, I won't call it a reasoning process exactly, but it's a compulsive kind of repetition. And Freud called it the repetition compulsion. We now understand it better as traumatic reenactment, that it's deep, it's in the body, it's people reenact without even knowing it. And my hope is that if we get to people young enough and teach them about it, they'll be able to see it before it's too late. But it's a powerful dynamic in human social existence as well, that we just keep going back to doing. I mean, under the current regime, they seem to want to take us back to about 1950 and are doing everything they can to make sure we are back at 1950. And it's not going to work, of course. And it's driven by this compulsion to reenact. And it keeps everybody in command from actually having to deal with what their consequences are of their policy decisions. So they don't have to deal with any of it. They don't know more than they've dealt with their own personal stuff. I think that's where it comes from. It's what to do about it that matters. And it means that people who are not as disturbed need to step up to the plate and vote and talk and make a big fuss. Because this is not okay. We need to move ahead, not backwards. And we're enough said. Go ahead, Izzy.
Sandra, excuse me, I just wanted to say is there was an elephant in about traumatic reenactment. There was an elephant, she was a circus elephant, terrible, terrible torture. And when she came to Sanctuary, the Sanctuary person, was just shocked because that female elephant would abuse other elephants in the same place, in the same way that human trainers would torture other elephants.
That's what we see in families where there has been a child tortured, grows up, becomes a parent, and then does the same thing to their children. I mean, it's transgenerational. And it's very real. It's huge. You don't find healthy, happy parents torturing their children. These are people who have been tortured. And, they're reenacting it. And that does something very problematic. And simply thinking that the cure is to take the kids away from the parents, that doesn't really, it creates more problems. You may have to, because it may be the only way to save the child, but it's not a good solution. And, the good solutions would be much more encompassing, or where people would be surrounded with a lot of help, a lot of support, and get the empathy that they needed as children to be parents and to parent. And we don't do that. We don't have those kinds of connections that people need.
So you're advocating for trauma-informed people to be working throughout, not just healthcare and education.
Everywhere.
Certainly in those areas. And in a similar way, those who are working with wildlife, with many animals, with many domestic animals in sanctuaries, those people require the same kind of skills in being trauma informed. And I know that you and Saha Yunosi are partnering with the Kerelos Centre with creating presence with nature, trauma-informed education and policy, looking into the attitudes and treatment of wildlife and transforming our relationship with nature from trauma causing to trauma healing. Do you see this? This is obviously sort of vital from the perspective of those non-humans who are within the care of people, but this perhaps also can play a part in healing the rift between us and non-humans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's knowledge is liberating. And when you know what you're seeing and you can explain it in a different way, you develop more empathy. That's what I see in these young people all the time. I have much more empathy now when I see behavior that is a problem. I want to understand it instead of just punish it or get away from it. Well, yeah, exactly. And it's the same going to be the same with people working with animals, because troubled animals are troubling and frustrating, and it's hard work to do that kind of work. But the more you understand about it, the more you're in a position to actually do something about it.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you were saying, the subject of trauma gets forgotten and on a repeated basis, and I was thinking, and you were talking about the biological cause or the genetic cause, and at the time I was thinking, well, I can understand, not condone in the slightest, but I can understand these commercial reasons for pharmacology, that there would be a sort of like a strong drive towards encouraging that there can be a sort of a medical treatment, a drug treatment. But then when you start thinking about a society where AI can be involved in taking over so many sort of human jobs, and where there are large numbers of workforce who are out of work, and you think we actually need more people employed in caring work. So wouldn't it make some kind of commercial and social sense to actually have these training programs, to have people who are doing the training? Isn't there a case, a sort of like an economic business case for actually engaging in this kind of transformative work?
Ooh, Izzy, how radical that is. It would be wonderful. Yes, there is a great need, and because everything's been going in the opposite direction than that. We've been losing staff, losing positions, losing carers constantly everywhere. But that would mean that there would need to be a shift in the economic priorities.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as neoliberal capitalism is the dominant economic model, then nothing changes. As long as we're willing to tolerate the level of social inequality that we have, nothing is going to change. So it would be wonderful to see people being pulled into caring and teaching positions where they could actually make a living and support their families. That would be wonderful, and needs to happen. But that will only happen with significant political change.
Yeah, so much of the things that need to happen in this world will only happen with serious political change, and you feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall every time that ends up as being the thing that we're relying on for something to change. I'm going to open up for people to ask questions to Sandy or to Gay. So have your questions ready. You can put your hands up, or you can type something into the chat. But before that, while people are getting their ideas ready, just to ask you, I know you have canine companions.
I do.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Two of them.
obviously someone who's as connected to the more than human world as to the specifically human world. How do you, and you were saying when Gay was talking, well, it's just obvious that animals will respond in the same way. But you haven't been engaged in that on a professional capacity so much, but what are could you just sort of like give us your account of an understanding of trauma-informed care from the point of view of our non-human friends?
I think it's very much like, I don't have any children either, but I think it's very much like having young children, because I do have them next door. Is that you do have to read behavior. You do have to understand what the non-human being or very young human being is trying to communicate, but it's all about communication. So even when the behavior is problematic with my dogs, they're telling me something that they need that they're not getting. They're frustrated in some way. I've had a lot of dogs, so I'm pretty good at I'm getting decently good at dog. But I mean, they're trying to communicate to me because they can't use words. So they have to come and stare at me, or they have to come paw me, or they have to come look really hungry. And I have to interpret what the message is, which is children do the same thing. So, I think it's so important to be clued into an understanding that behavior means something. Mm-hmm. It isn't just, it is communication, and injured beings will not communicate directly and clearly if they've been hurt. So when Gay was talking about the example of the teenage elephants that are violent, they're communicating and they're not being adequately heard. And it was interesting when she talked about the older males being introduced to them, and yet it didn't work. But I wonder why it didn't work. It was a good experiment. It was a good thing to try. But I wonder why it didn't. What happened? Because they needed that influence and they weren't getting it. Maybe I don't know. I don't know enough about it. Gay might, but there's a question here.
Yes, there is a question, and it is on precisely that subject. Pam, I don't know if you want to ask your question or if you'd prefer for me to read it. I'll just give you a moment that you can unmute yourself if you wish and ask. And now I'll probably start talking right as Pam does. She says, this is for both Gay and Sandy. The example you gave, Gay, of the young male elephants being so traumatized that they attacked the rhinos, then the elder male elephants being brought in, did not really address the psyche of these young elephants. What has been brought to these young male elephants that is working? Is Sheldrake's work? What's Cynthia Moss doing, etc.? She'd love to know if there's been a healing process underway or not.
Well, you want me to talk? I'll talk first, Sandy. Well, the Sheldrake's is a perfect example because they, just to put it simply, hi Pam, they do a cross-species, a trans-species reconstruction of a normative elephant development, and which means loving. These are severely traumatized babies, and they move across species. There's other elephants there too, so they really have. If you look at it from a behavioral or a structural point of view, they've recreated the tableau of what an baby elephant would experience to be in his or her lifetime. So there's stages that they do that. Cynthia Moss approaches elephants in a different way. She's not looking at it from a healing perspective, psychological, well, I should say healing perspective. She's been documenting for five decades now, as we heard, what elephants do, and how they interact and things like that. Daphne approached it, what I would say, more like a mother, in the sense of she knew elephants and was learning even more about them because she was a fifth generation there. And she just, I think she just, translated what she did with her own children from, an elephant point of view. Sandy, I'd like you to talk about this. I think that this was my interpretation why the big males didn't work. By the way, I just want to make a comment, is the notion there was dominance there. Elephants don't dominate. That's a myth. There isn't and I don't even think aggression is a word that should be used. But I just want to say, for the older males, they were translocated. They were moved over. I don't know from where. And that in itself is very traumatogenic.
Yep.
Just want to make a comment about that. And elephants, in many places, in particular South Africa, and other places where there's such intense commercialization and, on reserves and parks and all, they're just moved like chess pieces. And no one takes that into account, what that means. So if you really think about, that every elephant, and not just the elephants, we'll just focus on the elephants, but the elephant is, has all these strings attached to the ground and to that elephant and this, all over. So it's just this kind of big mesh. And so when you translocate, what you're doing is you're ripping and tearing this sort of essential tissue of elephant psyche, unconscious society, the whole shebang. So what you're doing is you're creating these fissures, you're creating these tears. So, the way I look at the big males coming in is because these young males, they never had, Sandy, you know more than me, but my interpretation is that they were, if you want to look at it from a neuroscience perspective, which I don't, to me is a heuristic. Okay. It's just a heuristic, not reality, but it's a heuristic, is that, the trauma that they suffered, seeing the slaughter of their family with this noise, that is not anything that you can escape from. There's
right.
Nothing or anything. And it, the way I looked at it is it almost literally makes a wound inside. So those teenage elephants were walking around with a wound in their heads.
Right.
It's not just the heads, but, we could literally say there's a wound, and there's a wound in the psyche. So when you bring in big males, okay, that's nice, but it's like that wound, it is still there.
Yep.
And they, when they're with their parents and not their parents, their mothers, the allo mothers and their siblings and cousins, all of that is shaping them and informing them. And so it's like they never had that.
Right.
And they were wounded.
Yep.
So, it's kind of like, it's great to see someone in charge and whatever, and to have that thing, but they're basically also strangers in the sense of all of a sudden there's these big strangers in that way. It's really
important. That's really, really important. And that is basically what happened to all of us who are of European descent about 10,000 years ago. So that all those connections were broken, not as violently necessarily, but we all used to live like that, just the way you describe. And that was radically altered and around the agricultural revolution. So, I think it reminds me of kind of a taking a child and putting them into who's aggressive, right, and is lashing out, and because of the abuse they've experienced in their family, and then putting them into a foster family of lovely people and thinking that it's all going to be fine. Well, maybe, but not necessarily. Because just because you put them with nice people doesn't mean that the underlying issues have been in any way addressed with the child. So yeah, do you want to?
Yes, there's a question from Kim. Kim, I don't know if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question. We've seen you on Living One before, so feel free to speak up if you'd like.
Thank you very much. It's a great presentation and most informative and stimulating. So my question really is about the various dedicated elephant sanctuaries in North America, Brazil, and Asia. And if either of the two speakers would like to comment on the efficaciousness of those sanctuaries and the work that they have with rescuing elephants. I'm not looking for gossip or any particular sanctuary to be focused upon, but are these sanctuaries providing what I think to be valuable work in your view? Thank you.
I'll answer, and then Sandy, please. Kim is writing a book, Topsy, the elephant. So, basically it varies, I think. There were only a few elephant sanctuaries, and then there've been increasing numbers. It's very specific. Places are called sanctuaries that that are not really sanctuaries. If you look at it through a lens of what Sandy's been discussing of trauma healing, and also psychological, there for the most part, even though there's a lot of sympathy and empathy for elephants and other animals, there's still a tendency to objectify them in loving ways, but not so much at the psychological level. So in a sense, by my definition, a sanctuary would be someplace which would be Daphne Sheldrick's, Angela, the Sheldrick Trust. Because in my mind, that's one to focus on. Yes, they do focus on babies, but they grow. But the point is it's really they're really healing, like the way Sandy talked about. It's the trauma informed, where they're actually helping the society, the elephant society, recover. It's very porous. And so in a sense, what they do with the babies, and then these different stages where the babies are finally, when they're teenagers, the males go off and reintroduced as such to the larger society, it's very porous. Elephants come back that were there, related, they've had grandchildren, etc. So you're really, that to me is something what I would encourage is focus on that as an example of a trauma-informed care, in terms of that at the level that Sandy's talking about, at this fundamental not that the elephant society needs that, but I'm trying to say at the base level of creating space and resources that are really holistic. It's not just the baby, it's the whole which is being recreated or healed.
They live in communities, right?
Yeah. Yes, please feel free to comment.
We're meant to too.
Well, I was thinking when you
ritual, which Sandy, you see. I mean, it's transformative for the humans.
Yes, absolutely.
I was thinking when you were talking about the Industrial Revolution, I had just become made more cognizant of the impact of the enclosures in England. So from, I don't know, about the 13th century all the way through to the 19th, land was, and it was a vast amount of land was progressively taken away from the common people and put into the hands of feudal barons, which destroyed people's connections to the land. I mean, John Clare, the famous Northamptonshire poet. He was effectively, he went mad, and that madness was a traumatic response to the loss of the land, the loss of the connection with the land. And so, you know, deep in our traditions, we have some understanding of that, of that pain of being pulled out of that meshwork, which is indeed one of the reasons why, just to promote next year on Living One, the subject is home and belonging, and we will be looking at that meshwork idea from a multi-species perspective, as well as talking to individuals in particular nations, people who've had their land taken away from them, who are in war-torn environments, and so this is still very much going on for people as well as for the more than human community. But I was thinking, Sandy and Gay, about those animals who are not in sanctuary, but who are, I mean, watership down. You know, you have your warren ploughed up, or the cyanide pumped into your warren, and there's a whole generation of, you know, of wild animals who are going through trauma, and there's nothing. I mean, you know, there's no sanctuary, and there isn't trauma informed care amongst a traumatized non-human population. So how do we think about that?
Well, all I can say to that is that all of you who are doing that kind of work, I really respect what you're doing and appreciate that you are able to get that close to that level of destruction of animals. I can handle it in people, but I could not psychologically handle it with animals, because they're so much more vulnerable and at this point so much more dependent on us. And so I don't know. You know, it's going to take a massive social action movement to stop that kind of horrendous abuse.
And it is a traumatic experience for those who are involved in caring as well.
Oh,
I see Harry has his hand up. Oh, sorry, Gay. Gay, just respond to that.
I was just gonna say that I think that, you know, that human trauma informed work is so powerful, because it just shifts how, and maybe Sandy, you could say a little bit more like about presence, creating presence, sort of what the elements are. Like, for example, one of them is power, and that really hit me, you know, because there's so much implicit power in which is culturally normative in the whatever, you know, in that way. And we're not even, I mean, you know, that's something that I have to constantly kind of keep aware, you know, with, you know, caring for the animals here. I don't like to call it sanctuary, my extended family, because I am responsible for them, and I do have to make decisions, and yet it can easily slide into a power thing where I'm not spending enough time in silence with them. I mean, it doesn't mean sit around while they're suffering, but I mean really deeply listening, and not falling into making a decision too quickly or making an assumption too quickly. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. Why the trauma?
So yeah, I'd be glad to share what presence stands for. It's I have one of my animal creatures here. Yeah, this is Vala. It's partnership and power. So it's how do we have partnerships and know that there's always power. Power is not a bad thing in and of itself. It's how it's used. R is for reverence and restoration, and that's a lot about recognizing the sacredness of life. The first E is for emotional wisdom and empathy, safety and social responsibility, embodiment and enactment, nature and nurture, culture and complexity, and emergence and evolution. And then we build all of the skill set, all of the knowledge into those 8, 16, that meaning framework. That's my latest thing. That's the book I have to write this winter. So I'm gonna.
Well,
There's
you know, that's
already
just a
on
little
the site.
project.
If you look up Creating Presence or Sandy, it you know, it has been implemented in medical in organizations.
Yeah. Is that, yeah, what, yeah, it is being adopted by various healthcare organizations and educational institutions. Yeah, so it's out there. It's all online. So it's an online process that organizations can adopt. It's focused on getting whole organizations to move in the right direction and to have a set of clear values and skills. Skills to know what to do when you're in difficult difficult situations. That's what it's really for. So yeah, it's there. It's available. It's online. You can find it. You just have to put in Creating Presence. And we'll be happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to us about it. Thanks for asking.
Thank you for explaining. And Harry, I saw you had your hand up a little earlier. I don't know if you'd like to. Yes.
Yes, why not? Thank you, Gay. Thank you, Sandra, for an inspirational conversation, and Izzy for so nicely curating it. I would like to come back, Sandra, to what you said about knowledge as being necessary for doing something about something. Because it seems that there's actually hardly any knowledge claim that is not contested. And so it seems to be quite common to say, okay, you need knowledge before you can do something about it. But is that a claim that can stand the test of time, actually, if you look how we muddle through history and our daily realities ourselves, and no matter educational backgrounds and what have you, especially in the domain of mental health and public health?
Well, it's a very good question, Harry. I'm actually reading a book on ignorance right now.
Give me two copies, please.
It's on Kindle. You know, I think that what I see and what's so invigorating for me is when I have organized the delivery of knowledge in different modalities to these undergraduates. So these are kids from my point of view. And watching them develop over the course of, and it's just a 10-week course, but it's what they have to do. They have to do a discussion board. They have to watch a bunch of videos. They have to listen to a bunch of recorded lectures that I've done. They have to read material I've told them they have to read. They have to report on all this, so I have to read it too, what they say. and they have to keep a journal, and they have learning activities. So I watch the develop of what the knowledge, the ways it gets embedded in different people in different ways. So some people, they really get it as a result of the videos. Other people, they really get it because of my lectures. Other people, it's what they read. Other people, they relate to it because in the learning activity, it was immediately what they went through, So I watched that knowledge develop over time, and I watch them, at least that's what they're feeding back to me, the changes that they're making in their life as a result. And I get pretty convinced, Harry, that at least with the knowledge that we now have, we've been accumulating since the 70s about trauma and its impact over the lifespan, particularly when it begins in childhood. We know so much more now about development because of all the attachment research and those The attachment work and the trauma work are like this. They are closely, intimately connected. And so I think that the knowledge base is strong enough to meet up against those who want to pull it apart. I hope it is, anyhow. I remain, hopeful about that in the long run. That's why I go on teaching, because I'm teaching kids. These jerks who are now running the show are not going to be around forever. And the kids will. It's the next several generations that I've been exposing to this. So I'm hoping that will make a difference in time, because I think the human species does grow and develop as long as we're here. So not as quickly as I would like to see, but I think it does happen, and we can see that if we really look. But there's still a long way to go, still a lot to do, Harry.
Thank you. I wonder if anyone else would like an opportunity to put their hand up. Otherwise, I'll offer Gay and Sandy the chance to have some final words, some thoughts to leave us with after what has been a sort of truly inspiring and a wonderful conversation. Sandy, maybe you'd like to go first.
Well, what I think we need to aim for is what I've called biocratic cultures, or creating a biocracy. Recognizing that everything on the planet is a living being and a part of a living system shifts the way you look at everything that goes on, and we need to get more people on board. The idea of a biocratic culture actually comes from a guy named Walter Buchanan. He was a guy from Harvard, pretty sure I'm remembering that correctly, and he was the guy that gave us the fight, flight, freeze response. He was a physiologist, and he identified it and called it that. And he became a president of the American, I forget what big, organization. But in his speech, he talked about the need for us to develop a biocracy. And I went, yeah. When I read that, I went, exactly. It's exactly the word I was looking for, because it's incorporating democratic principles, but understanding that it's living systems. And living systems all need the same things to stay alive. And they have to be in balance, and they have to communicate, and they have to have internal circulation and communication in the outside world. And that's what I think we need to focus on, is creating biocratic systems. And I'm trying to define what that means. So I'm working on that. More to come. Yay.
You're only giving yourself a little bit of light work to do over the winter and next year. So you'll have plenty of time to walk the dogs and everything else.
Right, exactly. I work from home, so that's all I have to do.
Oh, Gay.
Well, I have two things. I'm going to ask Sandy a question. I'm sorry, but I have to ask her that. But I'll make my comment. What came up when you asked that question was this. It's a country western. It's an old one, you can't tell. Oh, now I'm going to mess it up. Anyways, you can't tell what I'm feeling, from the outside. Anyways, it's a much more like a Hank Williams type of thing. And I guess that's something that I find that I have experienced, and I find that that's the work in, like Sandy's work, the trauma work and trauma informed is really seeing. I think we need to learn to see beyond form. When we relate to each other, that somehow which we do, I think a lot of us do. For example, like, when someone that we care for dies, very attached to the form. I mean, there's such beautiful forms, all these wonderful forms. But really, when we think about it, the form is almost like just a costume. It's really the essence of that individual that we miss. That is expressed, and in the rabbitness, and then in the stellar jayness, and the dogs. So I guess that's something that I think is so important, is to try to cultivate seeing, trees and animals, and everyone else, everything part of the biocracy, is don't get so hung up on the form. I mean, have it in form. Rabbits in general don't like to do what dogs do, or, what parrots do, or whatever. It's like different cultures, but really tune into the listening. There's a lot going on, and not to just see beyond form. I guess I think that's really important. And the silence, that listening. And I think that's a very critical part of trauma informed. Again, Sandy, you're the Kuba on that, but to me, that's really, I think, really important. Really, it's vital. It's vital, and to go beyond prejudice of form, and that in itself is a wonderful feeling, because there's a lot of sense of loneliness and isolation, and when we are able to do that, kind of connect, we call it soul to soul, or essence to essence, or whatever, in that way, it's much less lonely and much less disconnected in that way. So that's kind of what I think. That maybe that's your biography, different version of that, an operative function in that way. But the question I want to ask you, and it's not technical, it's so important, like when we're talking about elephants, trauma transmission. And you said transgenerational, but it's also, like, I call it vertical, which is across time, transgenerational, and horizontal, which is across space in relationships. And I just wondered if you could just maybe talk about that, because I think there's such an, again, we're so object oriented, and it's not understanding the invisible tissue. So I don't mean to make you go through another lesson, but I just like you to maybe talk a little bit.
What it brings up, Gay, is what we haven't really touched on that much, which is the way healing can occur. Because trauma can occur vertically and horizontally, but so can healing, and so can post-traumatic growth. I know about that in people. I can't speak to that in animals. But I know that people are able to become conscious of the things that have happened to them, and to use that to develop more empathy for others and for other living things. So, honoring, even if you can't get in, if you're working with other people and you're not comfortable really getting people to detail what has happened to them, even just talking about post-traumatic growth and the growth of empathy can be a really positive way forward for whatever has to happen to help the animals, because that's what has to be developed in humanity, is more empathy. While these jokers are telling us that empathy is a disease, we have to counter that with, no, that is what human beings, that's what's most central for human beings, is empathy. And when we don't get that, we end up really screwy, and we do bad things to each other and to the world around us. So that the notion of that you can grow out of this and you can heal and get better, I think is really important for people to understand. And we better stop pretty soon, because I'm getting a very clear communication that somebody wants dinner and wants to go out, and it's about time, Mom.
And that voice must be heard.
That voice must be heard.
I will say that there is that post-traumatic growth. Michelle Franco, who we'll be hearing later, and I have been working with an elephant in South Africa who had, one of these god-awful, baby torture, all this thing. And he's in his 40s, which is no spring chicken for an elephant or anyone. And he's in natural setting. It's a reserve. And he's, this is just an example, is healing or being able to have the opportunity. I think that's it. Yep. Having that, taking away the stressors, and then sort of like letting the flowers start to come out. So.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gay, and thank you so much, Sandra. It's been a privilege for us to hear your wisdom and all spoken in such sort of wonderful empathy and vivacity. I've so enjoyed hearing and learning from you this evening for me, this afternoon for you. So thank you so much, both of you. And I will hand over to Olivia, who will sign us off.
Thank you, Izzy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gay.
Thanks, Izzy, and thank you to Gay and Sandra both. And I echo everything Izzy said. This has been incredible and mind-opening and expansive and just wonderful. So thank you both so much. And we are very excited for the rest of this series of Living One. Our next gathering will be a week from today on Friday, November 14th, and we'll be back at our usual time of 10 a.m. Pacific time. We're glad all of you made it today. We're never sure when we change the time if people are going to know to come. So thank you all for being here, and for anyone watching the recording, thank you to you as well. But next week on the 14th, we will be back at 10 a.m. Pacific time, so we hope you'll all join us. We will be joined by Deke Weaver, who will tell us about Jojo and Hero, the elephants in the unreliable bestiary. So hope to see everybody there. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you so much, Sandra and Gay, for your time and expertise and just absolute brilliance. It's been wonderful. Take care, everybody. Have a lovely weekend.